Okay, it is now 7:00 p.m. and as you know from seeing our agenda, we're going to hold a special call board meeting at this time for the third reading of the 2019-2020 general fund budget. And then once that is done, and we are going to open it up for citizens' participation if anybody would like to comment on the budget, we will adjourn that public hearing. And then we'll immediately go into our regular general session. So you ladies are in for a treat. So buckle up. Anyway, we want to welcome everyone. So at this time, do I hear a motion to adjourn executive session and begin the special call board meeting regarding the third reading of the 2019-2020 general fund budget?
So moved.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Powers. Are there any questions or comments, board, before we go into the meeting? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries and it is unanimous. I would like to notify you that the district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of this meeting. And we are going to go to 5.0, which is the third reading of the 2019-2020 general fund budget. And then board, once we go into the general session following this meeting, that will become an action item and we will be voting on the budget tonight. So just for the public's information. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Mr. Butler. And before I do that, this is Mr. Butler's last night with us in terms of a board meeting. And Mr. Butler, how many years have you been with the district?
32 and a half.
32 and a half, and he has served us and our students well. So before we go into this portion of the budget, let's give him a round of applause and thank him for his service. And he is going to go out with a bang. So he's got a budget.
Mr. Butler, when you joined the district, how many children did we have in the district at that time?
Oh, gosh. 9.
Just ballpark?
I'm going to say it might have been around 7,000, 8,000.
Yep. And where are we today? I guess we're about to talk.
26,000.
Wow. A lot happens in 32 years, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Butler, take it away.
All right. Thank you. And I do appreciate that. I'll say it's made my job a lot easier from the support that I've gotten, especially from the board. I know a lot of administrators and finance people across the state don't get that support, so I really appreciate it and appreciate the support from my staff and the principals and SLT. Just appreciate that very much. Excuse me. All right. So this is the third reading of our general fund operating budget for 2019-20. All right, so just kind of go over the difference between operating and capital budgets. Operating budgets are used for the day-to-day expenditures. You know, they're used to pay salaries, they're used to buy supplies, purchase services, everything, the utilities, everything day to day for operations. The capital budget, on the other hand, is strictly used for things like buildings, technology, renovations to buildings. Some other examples might include buses, library books, band instruments, and uniforms, but you cannot use capital money to pay for operations by law. So, far back as I can remember, we've been growing 500 to 700 students every year, and I think across the past 10 years or so, it's a little over 500. Last year was, for the 18-19 year, it was 488 students. The previous year was 616. So we're predicting for next year a little over 500 new students in growth for 1920. So some considerations for the budget process. We have to meet mandated expenditures without sufficient state funding to meet those expenditures. We have to provide for the student growth that we just talked about. We have to meet federal and state requirements, the inflationary costs for things like insurance, utilities, et cetera, and then to ensure quality and support for students and staff. The priorities for the 1920 budget, 3 years ago when Dr. Little came, he had an initiative we called Drive to 35, and it was that the lowest paying starting salary for a teacher would be $35,000. Got a little slide a little bit later. When he came, it was about $32,800. Also to meet this state mandated 4% certified salary increases, a 2% support staff salary increase, and a 1% administrative salary increase. So beside those percentages, all three groups, certified, support, and administrative, will receive a step for all eligible employees. And of course, we have to open Beechwood Middle School. We've got supplemental student support, which things like OT, PTs, mental counselors, interventions, those things for support for students. And then we wanted to maintain current class ratios. So if you look at the ratios over the past 3 years, you can see the columns to the left. We've reduced ratios across those 3 years quite a bit in our elementary schools. Kindergarten going from 20:61 to 22:1. First grade 24:1 to 22:1. Second grade 25:1 to 22:1. Third grade has remained at 25:1. And then fourth and fifth grade going from 26:1 down to 25:1. So beside the reduction in ratios, we've also tried to improve the salaries, as I mentioned. So the drive to 35 has become arrived at 35. You can see there across the past 4 years, the increase in that first beginning step for teachers. Like I said, when Dr. Little came, I think it was at 32.8. And this year we'll be at 35,991. So almost 36,000. So besides reducing class sizes, we've also been able to raise teacher salaries. And this talks about the beginning cell, but it builds all the way up. So it's not we're just increasing the bottom, it's everybody gets that same type increase. And then the changes from second reading to third reading. Shoot, skip. Okay. We were able to reduce the amount we have in there for a step increase by 1.2 million. This came about when we did an analysis of the difference. If everybody moved a whole step every year, then we go from, whatever it might be, step 15, then everybody go to step 16. What we found out was it wasn't quite that way. It might be from step 15 to the average being 15.5 or 15.7. So we used that to budget by. So we were able to reduce 1.2 million there. And then we also received, since second reading, increases in our property and casualty. A lot of that had to do with the reinsurance that our carrier has put into place. Increase in workers' compensation insurance, $280,000. That comes from increase in the pay, increase in the number of employees, And also increase in the number of incidents we've had over the past 3 years. They take that into account. So then the cost of additional mental health counselors, that's 8 counselors for $160,000. And then for certified staff, for elementary, we have 7.0 new certified, 29.8 middle school, 9.5 high school, and 17.8 special needs certified. We've tried to really put an emphasis on the special needs this year because we found out throughout the year we seem to have to keep adding. So hopefully trying to look at that up front, we won't have to add as many special needs personnel as we've had in the past. And then 5 pool positions for a total of 69.1. So this is a net staffing changes excluding Beechwood and the transfers from Pleasant Hill and the Lexington Middle School. This would just be basically normal growth. So certified 43.3, support 1.7. You notice there's a -3 for central services administrators. That's actually my position. We had a director of accounting and a director in communications that are not being filled. And then we added 1 school administrative staff, which is an assistant principal. Then we had supplements, additional days, and additional salary increases, $517,000. So total of 43 FTE at 3.4 million.
Remind us again on the school administrative staff, isn't that the position based on the number of students at a particular school, and we had to go up
Yeah,
to
we
meet the
have a
requirements?
formula ratio for that. So it's really not adding at Beechwood because we're actually transferring the assistant principal from Lexington Middle School to Beechwood. This is actually due to Lexington High School hitting that certain level where they're actually doing another assistant principal. Second year startup costs for Middleland Middle School, Beechwood Middle School. Hold on. Here we go. All right, startup costs for Beechwood Middle School. Salaries and related costs for Beechwood Middle School be a total of 86 FTE. Now, we'll have some savings because we'll be able to transfer some of those staff from Lexington Middle and Pleasant Hill Middle to Beechwood. So as a lot of those students transfer to Beechwood, a good bit of the staff will go with them. So the net salaries and related costs is 34.55 at 2.3 million. And then the programs and services, 75,000. That's their second year allocation for their library books. Total of 2.38 million. And then the general fund support staff. So we're actually reducing school support instructional staff by 10.5. A lot of that has to do with the state's requiring computer lab assistants now to be certified, whereas before we had support staff in there. So we've had to relocate that staff and put certified positions in those computer labs, which is one of the reasons you see the increase in certified staff. Special needs, 7 positions. Other school support, 11.95. That's mainly the housekeeper and custodial for Beechwood Middle School. And then there's also some secretaries and bookkeepers included in there. And then we have 2 central services support, and that would be a carpenter for our maintenance department and a computer technician for Beechwood Middle School. So the overall net staffing changes, certified, 69.1, about $5 million. Support staff, a little over 10, 437,000. We mentioned the three reductions to central services administrative staff, the increase in one school administrative staff, the assistant principal, and then the overall supplements of additional days and temporary salaries, 624,000. So the overall increase, 77.55 positions at $5.7 million. Last year, we added on some safety cost. I called it layered safety. We kept hearing about the state was going to give us some funding for security. Well, come first of the year, there was no funding for additional security for schools, which is why last year we had to increase millage by 4.45 mils in order to pay for that safety. This year, we're added some additional safety, board-certified behavioral analyst, and then we've got additional school safety officers, which is a contracted service, 326,000, and then the 8 additional mental health counselors I mentioned earlier, 160,000. So a total of 578,000 for the layered safety. Okay, state funding shortfalls. This is the reading coaches and the nurses. Now, we do receive money from the state for those positions, but each year that gap between the cost for those positions and the amount we receive from the state gets wider and wider. The state actually reducing the amount that they're funding for those positions. So, for the reading coaches, we're having to add an additional $64,000 on top of what we've already covering, and nurses, $41,000 on top of what we're already covering. So for the past 3 years, we've had to pick up a total of $617,000 for reading coaches and $117,000 for nurses, for a total shortfall from the state of $734,000. State funding shortfall for mandated expenditures. New state revenues, $7 million. The mandated expenditures are something that we have no say-so about. They're mandated by the state. Retirement increase of $2 million. The 4% certified increase, $5.5 million. And then we're required to give teachers a certified step, $1.6 million, for a total shortfall of $2.2 million. This does not include any of the other increases for support administrative or a step for support and administrative, but we do have those in the budget. Increases in programs and services. The school resource officers we mentioned, contractual services, mainly being for licensed professionals like OTs, PTs, and psychologists. Funds to replace for reduction in middle schools, replace fee reductions in middle schools, 100,000. We've tried to put an emphasis on actually reducing the amount of fees that parents have to pay. So when we do that, though, some of those we have to have the money for the schools because they're dependent upon them. So that's that 100,000. Human resources, 75,000. That's just for the increased cost of background checks, a lot of that being volunteers. We don't want people in our schools who we haven't run a background check or maybe should not be in the schools with our children. Code to the Future supplies, 49,000. The 8 mental health counselors, 160,000. And then utilities, maintenance, and other insurance, 6,000, for a total of 966,000. Shoot. Okay, we also had some decreases in programs and services. Startup supplies for new schools. You can imagine most of the startup costs for supplies for Beechwood were in the current year's budget because we need them to open school. So there's a reduction there. The executive leadership program, reduction of 122,000. Communication expense, telephones basically, reduction of almost 60,000. And IT supplies, reduction of a little over 80,000. So total decreases of 374,000. All right, projected revenue changes. This is budget to budget, the current year's budget compared to what we're projecting next year's budget. Increase in local of 2.4 million. The increase in the state of 12.5. Now, we didn't get an additional 12.5 from the state. This is just budget to budget. Transfers, EA transfers and indirect cost, increase to 303,000. And actually, I've been able to reduce the amount of operational balance that we have in the budget by 744,000. So the total projected increase in revenue, $14.5 million. We've gone over this the last couple of presentations. This is the amount of money we're losing due to Act 388. It's a simple calculation. It's the difference that the amount that we would have received on homeowner property taxes compared to the amount that the state's actually giving us. And so just for last year, that shortfall was $41.3 million. So in the 10-year period, it's over $209,000 that we did not receive from the state that we would have received from homeowner properties. So it's an increase of about 4.1 million per year, and it's cumulative, so that's why it's the 209 million. Operating expenditures, most of our budget goes towards salaries. You see there, increase in salaries almost 14 million. Programs and services a little less than 600,000. For a total budget of increase of 14.5 million, and that's a 5.19% increase over the previous year. This is just a breakdown showing that, as I mentioned, most of our money is in salaries. So that's 87.75%. On salaries, 7.7%. And our programs and services, and then a little 4.5% for utilities and maintenance. There's also a cap, the amount of millages that we can increase because of Act 388. Our current millage rate is 322.4 mills. The allowable percentage increase, according to the state, is 4.72%, and that's a combination of the increase in the Southeast CPI and the growth in population in our district, which means we could increase millage 15.21 mills, value of a mill for operations being a little more than 282,000. That would generate up to around $4.3 million in new revenue. But in this budget, we are not recommending any millage increase for operations. So therefore, there's no new money because of the millage. So in summary, includes 77.55 positions for growth, includes a step increase for all eligible employees, a 4% increase for certified, 2% increase for support, 1% increase for administrative staff. Includes funding to meet state and federal requirements. Includes funding to cover the required inflationary cost, and does not include proposed millage increase for operations. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I have a question, Mr. Butler. On slide 18, where you have utilities and maintenance and insurance, originally, the increase in that service was $303,808, but now it's $6,264.
Is David in here? He's down at the other end. I noticed it as I was going through it. I'll have to get back with you on why that's the difference.
Okay. Also, last time I asked about the $20,000 for safety and health items. In an email, y'all said that was moved out of the safety officers because it was for personal protective equipment and other items. Is that still in the budget somewhere?
I'm sorry, what was it for?
It was for personal protective equipment and other health-related items.
It's still in the budget. It's just not, we decided that was not a part of the security, so we took that out of that particular line item.
Okay, so it just got moved to another line item?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry. Mr. Butler, the step increase, what's a rough percentage, average percentage for a step increase?
It varies a little bit. For most people, it's right around 2%.
Okay.
For certified through step 23, which is all further the state certified schedule goes to, it's right about 2%. Now, we go to 30, but the state doesn't give us any more money for that above 23, so it's a 1% after that.
Okay.
Similar with support, through year 25, it's 2%, and then 1% after that till year 30. Administrative is probably closer to about a 1, and it varies also depending on where you're on the scale, 1.5 to 1.7%.
Okay, so I'm assuming CPI, I think it's been like 1.8%, 2%, somewhere along there. I
Yeah, a
imagine
little over
Southeast.
2%, yeah.
Southeast is probably maybe a little less than that? Or is it
I
kind of
think it's a
around?
little over 2%
Okay.
this year, for the next year.
So regardless, even on in the worst case scenario, we're still staying above CPI for all levels of staff, administrative support and teacher, based off step
Yes.
plus the salary
That's
increase.
exactly right. Once you
Okay.
include the step, that's right.
Okay, so we're above the curve for CPI, all right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Dr. Little, you can answer this. There was a question in the past about memorandum of understanding with Lexington Area Mental Health, with the mental health counselor. Was there anything additional with that?
I believe Mr. Salters has some information on that, Dr. Guyton.
Dr. Guyton, we actually have a meeting with them tomorrow
Oh, okay,
to review that contract, so we have not finalized it yet.
okay,
But we
That's all.
have taken your input and are working with them on that.
gotcha. Thanks for your service, Mr. Butler.
Thank you.
Hey, what's the advice for the next 32 years when it comes to school finance? What's the parting words of wisdom for us so we don't mess it up?
Probably surround your people with people who are smarter than you are. And I've done that, and it's worked out really well. I know it's a low goal.
Well, we appreciate the service.
Thank you.
Board, are there any other questions regarding the budget reading?
I have one question. Are there any teaching positions that have not been filled that I'll just say, I got word that there, at a certain school, there's a teacher leaving and her position is not going to be filled once she leaves? Do you know anything about that?
I know we have some positions that still need to be filled, but Mr. Stacy might be able to answer that question better than I could.
There are positions, when we do the budget every year, we look at projected enrollments, and so there may be a position where a teacher was in a position and that position is no longer needed. that FTE, so we would not fill that position. Without knowing specifically what school and what position, it's kind of hard to address it, but, I mean, we look at it on a regular basis. In fact, I spent today looking at numbers from the different schools to try to see if there's any chance that we might be able to move an FTE from one school to another based on, we just had the Power School numbers move up, so I could look at numbers of students per section, and we're constantly reviewing that to see if we can move a teacher from one grade to another grade, because we just don't automatically add a teacher. We want to make sure we meet those ratios.
Okay, thank you.
But, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Stacy, but our process when this budget process starts is to use students as our stat, and that stat drives essentially the FTE budget.
That's correct.
And so as subdivisions come in, well, they don't really go, they seem to come, but then depending on where they go, that then drives the future
The
stat.
student, the numbers of students definitely drives the number of FTE that we have.
Board, any other questions? Okay, at this time, we're going to open it up for citizens' participation. This is only citizens' participation regarding the budget. If there's something else you would like to comment on, we are going to have regular citizens' participation during the regular board meeting, but this is a special call board meeting only regarding the budget. And we welcome any comments or any questions that any of you in the community have for us. We have cards available if you've not filled one out. Is there anyone who would like to address the board and make a comment or a question at this time? This is your chance. Okay, well, we will have citizens' participation during the regular board meeting, and if you think of a budget question, you can ask anything pretty much at that meeting, but this one is only just for budget. So if you do think of a budget question and you want to ask it on the second half of the meeting, feel free to at that time. At this time, unless there's anything else, board, regarding the budget, we're going to adjourn.
Ms. Smith, I just wanted to make one comment, because we can't talk about the budget without at least acknowledging the impact of Act 388 on us. I just did a little calculation, and for last year, for 2017, 2018, the Act 388 funding loss for that year alone would have been a 14.7% increase to our operating budget if we'd had those funds to work with, which would have been teacher salaries, extra positions, extra programs. And so it really is, you hear a lot about Act 388, but it has a real impact on the funding that we have and what we're able to do. And we're pretty amazing with what we do without it. And I dream about what we would do if we had even part of that money.
Exactly. Thank you, Ms.
Well,
Green.
and we talk about, we gnash our teeth when we raise mills 5 or 10, but if you took that 40 million and divided by 270 mills, that's a lot of mills we could reduce. And again, most people don't understand that our operating budget comes from a bucket of federal money, state money, and then local county property-owned money. And, you know, we talked about, Mr. Butler talked about how the state funding deficit. So what that means is we have to turn to federal or county sources for that deficit, which quite frankly, a lot of times ends up being our county resources. And then so it's business owners in the county that we have to turn to backfill that deficit. So it's an interesting beast.
It is a good point, and between Act 388 and the lack of funding for EFA through the base student cost, those two total together a little over $55 million, which means if we got that money from the state, we could actually reduce mills somewhere around 100 mills.
Well, and just a little bit to the point that Dr. Guyton was making about the step increase, the funding for the step increase comes through the EFA funding. Is that correct, Mr. Butler?
That's basically true, yes.
And so
And they're not increasing that this year, well, $5 per student.
$5 per student.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, this past year, they reduced what they had allocated by $5 in January.
That's
kind
right.
of under the radar.
That's true.
Any other questions or comments, board? Okay. At this time, we'll adjourn the public hearing. Do I have a motion to adjourn the public hearing?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Green. Are there any questions or comments regarding the adjournment? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of adjourning the Third reading of the budget, public hearing. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now in adjournment, and let's give us about 5 minutes. So if anybody wants to stretch or run to the restroom, we'll have about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll come back into regular general session, and we'll get started again. And I think there might be some people out there that we need to let in, so that's why we're going to stop for just a minute.